Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mary Sherling, Cass County Commission, and today is February 23rd, 2022, and this is the Land Management Committee of the Diversion Board of Authority. Don, could you take the roll?
Mrs. Sherling.
I am here.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Grubb. Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Mr. Borboom.
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson. Mr. Olson.
Here.
Mr. Breitling. Ms. Mongeau.
Present.
Ms. Preston. Mr. Zimmerman. Quorum is present.
Wonderful, thank you. You have before you the agenda. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
So moved. Mojo second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those opposed say aye. The motion carries. Minutes of the previous meeting, you've had an opportunity to review those. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Campbell moves.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. And who seconded?
Nathan did.
Thank you, Nathan. All those opposed say aye. And the motion carries. On to item number 4, the flowage easement update. Who is taking that for us?
Commissioner Sherling, this is Jody Smith. I'll kick it off. I'm going to hand it over to Eric here in a minute.
Great. Thank you, Jody.
Okay. So today we thought we'd bring an update, so an informational point to the committee to review. The Floyd easement appraisal process is ready to go forward to the joint boards. I'll have you go to the next one. What we really want to do is start by overviewing the entire process so you understand that this was not made of light of heart, but really was a 2-year process that the board and this committee have engaged in. We started 2 years ago, began with the feasibility study with Crown Appraisals, if you recall that, or if you're a member of this committee when that occurred. Those feasibility studies, I'm going to have you flip to the next slide. Sure. Entailed a phase 1 and a phase 2. The phase 1 was a market research before we knew exactly where the impacts were going to be. And then phase 2, we applied the findings of that phase 1 to exact parcels. Once we knew that, we issued the CLOMR approval. There was appraisal work and boundary surveys that had been initiated. Informational videos had been created. We've had public meetings. If you recall, last summer, Crown Appraisals also met with all of the landowners. Those flowage easements have been prepared. The flowage easement review has occurred. We'll have John present tomorrow at many of our meetings to go through the process that he completed, and we'll be seeking board action from the 2 joint boards tomorrow so that we can issue those easements.
So I'll step in here. One of the things we wanted to brief with the committee here, and we'll brief with the boards tomorrow, is just a high-level overview of the appraisal findings. So this slide is something that we had developed last summer with Crown, the appraiser. And as they looked at the appraisal assignment, they concluded through both their phase 1 and into phase 2 studies that the flowage easement that we need to acquire is really a combination of 2 different property rights. And the bottom of the slide here summarizes that as we need to pay for the loss of development rights. In addition, we need to pay for the increased flood risk. And so prior to the project, the property owners have all of those rights today, but the project and the flowage easement will be impacting those 2 rights. And so this slide tries to highlight that difference. As we went through the process with Crown, the appraiser concluded different percentages of diminution of value for both of those 2 rights. So the loss of development rights is the first line. They concluded through market research that the loss of development rights ranged from 8 to 10%, and that depends on which mitigation zone. There are 4 mitigation zones. They also concluded that the increased flood risk has a range of 7 to about 30%, and that depends on the depth and duration of the flooding. So the combination of those is a range from about 15 to 40% would be the total diminution in value of ag land. And I stress their ag land because we all know that in the upstream mitigation area, the vast majority of the land is strictly ag land, but there are some areas what we would call transitional land. And so land that is in transition from farmland to some type of urban development is considered transitional land, and that land generally has a value over and above farmland value. And so in those situations, in addition to items 2 and 3 on the compensation, the appraiser has concluded we also need to pay for what's called a change in use. And so we need to pay for the change from transitional land down to farmland. So this next slide gives a summary of how we would apply those findings, for example, on some transitional land. So you can see here, for example, if the land, transitional land is worth $2,500 per acre, but farmland is worth $1,000 per acre, we first have to pay for that $1,500 change of use. And then once the farmland has been valued at $1,000, then we would apply the percentage diminution to come up with the value of the easement. And so the combination would be the $1,500 plus $350, or a total of $1,850 in that example. In more maybe real world numbers, there's some numbers on the bottom of the screen there that help explain that a bit further. This is a screenshot of actually one of the appraisal reports. These are abbreviated reports. They're roughly 4 pages of meat. There's a variety of maps and then some other supporting materials attached to a packet that's probably 12 to 15 pages per report, per parcel. But these, I'll go through the first 4 pages. So the first page is a cover letter. The second page, there's some pertinent facts about the parcel, including acreage breakdowns. And then the third page is a description of the values. And so in this example, you can see that there's a value of the transitional reconciled current value, in this case, $671,000. And then if that were just farmland, the appraiser concluded it would be worth $550,000. And so the first payment would be for change of use. And then again, there's the diminution percentages resulting in the farmland diminution, and the sum of the 121 plus the 192.5 results in the flowage easement payment. So that flowage easement payment is calculated on page 3, and then on page 4, there's just a summary paragraph explaining that this would be the flowage easement amount, and that's the amount that we would be offering to the property owner. Jody?
So with the completion of this, we are prepared, the land agents have prepared the Floyd easement packets. Again, once the boards approve them tomorrow, those will sync up. They'll all go out to the various landowners next week. So you can anticipate those kind of hitting their doorsteps approximately 5 days later. With that, then, there will be outreach made by our land agents in March. We do have our public information meetings. They'll be the 14th, 15th, and 16th here in North Dakota, and the 21st and 22nd in Minnesota. And then negotiations will begin April through December of next year. Are there any questions that we can answer?
Does anyone have any questions?
Just for this committee's awareness sake, tomorrow at the joint boards, in addition to this presentation, we will have a letter from John Albrecht, the review appraiser, sort of a certification letter, and then attached to John's letter is a list of all of the specific parcels, specific appraisals that we'll be asking each board to approve. So there's a list for North Dakota and a list for Minnesota.
So I do have a question for you. Just on, I want to make sure I understand this. On the loss of use, I believe it went up to 30%. Is that correct?
On the increased flood risk went up to 30%.
Oh, increased flood risk. Okay. why is that important if the land is still being farmed and everything else is being compensated for? You know,
Yeah.
can you just kind of dive into that? I'm just scratching my head over that one just a little bit. I'm not doubting it. I just want to understand it.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe two things that I would mention. So all of the findings that Crown has used in their valuation were based on market data that they found during both Phase 1A and 1B. And through that research effort, they looked at parcels all across the Red River Valley, up and down, all the way up to, north of Grand Forks and down into Richland County as well. And then they also found comparable sales in an area in Missouri, where there's along the Mississippi River, where there's flooding maybe, common or frequent like we have here. And so what they found was market evidence showing that the risks of flooding did impact buyers' willingness to pay for that land. And depending on the severity of the flooding, depending on a variety of different factors, they found market evidence that the increased flood risk would cause a change in value. And so that, I guess, from an appraisal sort of basics, that maybe would be the first thing I would point out. Secondly, we know that flooding on farmland does have some impacts. It can cause erosion, it can cause debris, it can cause delayed planting, it can cause, risk to growing crops, access issues, a whole variety of things that can come with that flooding. I think maybe what you're pointing out, Ms. Sherling, is that the Diversion Authority has some supplemental mitigation programs that we've committed to providing in addition to the flowage easement, and those supplemental programs might also be help providing additional mitigation for those risks, such as crop insurance. I think, that's probably a fair thing to point out, and I guess I would just say that, at the outreach committee meeting, we had a bit of a discussion about, the commitments that the authority has made to make sure that farmers in the area are, fully mitigated, and I think that this is just following suit with that commitment.
So it could be argued that they're being compensated twice for an event. Is that correct?
I suppose that I guess I would say you could suggest that there's multiple mitigation programs that layer on top of each other to fully address the concerns.
Because if there's crop insurance and we're going to do cleanup and all of those things, plus they're getting a payment in addition to that, it would seem to me that sounds like they're getting compensated more than once.
This is Commissioner Mojo from Clay County. I don't think in any way does this equal them getting compensated twice. I mean, it just is unreal to me that we would actually think that that's the case.
Commissioner
Thank you for your
Sherling,
comment. Yes.
I do have a comment. This is Roger. When you look at that 7 to 30%, I think the market is going to really dictate what that number actually is when that land exchanges hands and goes to another operator. And that's what Crown Appraisals has done. They've said that it's from their discovery that value is 7 to 30%. And I can understand that. I understand there is a risk for that purchaser of the land, the operator. Yes, the operators will be compensated if his crop is destroyed. But I think we need to separate that from the actual landowner, which could be one and the same, but that insurance that we're going to provide will be for the operator. And I think that's how you separate, and it is not paid. I don't see it as a double payment either.
That's a good point. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to clarify what was applied to get to these numbers, because I guarantee you this is going to come under scrutiny not only from the landowners that are affected, but, for the taxpayers that are footing the bill. So I just want to make sure that questions are readily answered. If I don't understand it, certainly there's going to be a lot of other people that will have questions as well. So that is what I'm just trying to bring up here. So does anybody else have any questions or comments? Eric, do you need anything from this group? Do we need to put our blessing on this, or is it just for?
Yeah, I think, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think this is primarily for information. We're not looking for any action from this group here today.
Okay. Well, very good. It's been a long time coming. I'm certain landowners will be at least happy to have the information in their hands. Thanks for all the work on it. Okay, then let's move on to the Billy Land Exchange, item number 5.
Okay. Good afternoon. So the next item on here is the Liley Land Exchange recommendation. So this is a settlement agreement that was brought forth to the MCC JPA last month, so in January. There was extensive conversation at that meeting. I believe it lasted for over an hour, kind of regarding this opportunity. This is something that the MCC JPA gave direction to our land agents and to our legal counsel on. So it has been worked through, again, with our legal counsel, so Onstead and Twitchell. It's kind of gone through our land agents, myself, and AE2S. We've been working with this landowner for over a year. There's a couple of points that are not reflected within this letter. One of those is that, I think it is at the beginning, but it is that we will, by approving this, be skirting 3 eminent domain cases. And I think that's really important for this committee to take into consideration today, and something that's certainly been an effort of mine since I've started a couple of months ago. The other thing is that, there are a couple of payments that weren't clearly outlined in this letter, and I take full responsibility for that, as I did review the letter before it was signed by Mr. Larson. I think that we need to take some of the other again, some of the other payments into consideration when reviewing this, just on a face value. It looks like that the exchange may not be equal, but again, when we start looking at what the Floyd easement would look like, the environmental assessment would look like, and some of the other payments that would go to the landowners, this actually is a fairly comparable deal for this committee and for the Diversion Authority Board. So today, really seeking that recommendation so we can take it forward to the Diversion Authority Board. Again, this has already been approved by the MCC JPA. It's already been kind of vetted through the landowners, and just looking to take it to the Diversion Authority Board so that we can close this one out.
Mary, this is Kevin, if I can, please.
Yes, please, Kevin, enlighten us a bit.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to be clear on this, that what transpired at our MCC JPA meeting, as Jody talked about, was basically a land counteroffer agreement that came before us. And after considerable discussion and weighing an awful lot of different issues related to this, what's before us now is basically a counteroffer to their counteroffer. It's not exactly what they wanted. There were some things in there that we felt important that we leave out of their original offer in the best interest of value for the MCC JPA and the Diversion Authority itself. So with that in mind, as Jody said, our full MCC JPA board, we spent 1 hour on just this one particular item, and we had an awful lot of dialogue, what ifs, and we felt that this counteroffer, as Jody mentioned, it also eliminates a lot of things. There were some other things that aren't included in there, such as that could have happened. Just give me a second here. I'm going back in my notes here, so. There are some other potential land damage issues that could have been brought up as part of this as well that we had a value to. So unless there's any other further questions, our MCCA GAPA board really felt that this was I see John's standing up.
May I?
Does someone?
Madam
question?
Chair, if I may.
Oh.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I just also want to concur with what Commissioner Campbell said. This is something that the MCC JPA board really weighed a lot of different variables in that. Certainly, we understand the organic farmland is something that the Diversion Authority has set aside for a reason, and I think this opportunity to retain some of that will help us mitigate some of those landowners going forward. But also, I think that because we're seeing a fairly significant uptick in farmland values right now, this one counter offer, I believe, could be paid for just with a re-leveling of what those land values are. Certainly, I think the number was around that $5,000 mark that was on the land. I know for a fact that a large portion of quality farmland sold for $8,000 an acre, 5 to 10 miles away from this particular parcel. So I really feel like this is going along with that fair and flexible policy that we have to make sure and work with the landowners the best way we can. But also I think it is in the Diversion Authority's best interest as well for this deal.
The other
Thank
component. Mary, one other thing, this is Kevin again, the word I was trying to get out in there that had not been considered at all and potential things was severance damages that could have been part of this, and we avoided all of that with this counteroffer of ours. So there was an extreme amount of discussion on this. John, I don't know if you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Campbell. And I was actually going to just briefly address the severance damage issue for OIN parcel number 257. So as part of this exchange, the Diversion Authority would be obtaining property rights on that parcel. Because the final design isn't quite done for that, we'll have the ability to acquire an additional 10, up to 10 acres to accommodate the core design. But as you can see, the southern embankment cuts kitty corner across the corner of that property, and there's a larger drain that runs through that. I'm sure the engineers could precisely tell us what the depth of that is, but that does create some access issues through the field. And by cutting off in that corner, you will have what are severance damages, and those have not been calculated because the appraisal we're not quite in the process of taking that parcel yet, but we know that we'll need to take it. And so the severance damages, we had a rough estimate internally what we thought that they might run. And so between settling the potential 3 eminent domain cases, which we knew that they would result in eminent domain if we're not able to reach agreement on 249, in addition to the severance damages, and then kind of getting this all wrapped up with OIN 257 and the Floyd easement, this transaction makes a lot of sense. I did also want to note for the board that this parcel, that these parcels that we would, or parcel that we would be exchanging is not considered excess property. Excess property is designated by the executive director as property that's no longer needed for the project. And so the excess property the project has had thus far has, I'll use an example, the stuff that was downtown Fargo. All the flood control has been built, it's been designed, you no longer need that property, it can be sold. These other parcels along the project right away in different areas, they may be needed to work with different tenants and farmers regarding land sales. And the other question, I can certainly answer any other questions that might come up, but From my position, I was recommending that this settlement go forward. I think it's a fair and reasonable settlement and a way to resolve potentially 3 litigation cases. Instead of spending attorney's fees litigating something, we can work with this landowner and come up with a reasonably fair solution.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Appreciate that input. Anyone else have any comments or questions for anyone?
Commissioner Sherling,
Or I would,
this is Roger. This is a
Yes,
great,
Roger.
this is a great way to mitigate. This is what the desire of the Cass County Joint Board has been. If somebody comes forward with an offer to swap some land, we look at this very friendly, and we think it is just a good option for us, and also a good option for the owner operator of the land. So I from my perspective, can support this 100%.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I would motion for to recommend to the diversion.
Roger,
Okay, I'll just state my motion. I will make a motion that we go forward to the diversion authority with a recommendation for this swap of land.
thank you. Is there a second?
Sorry about that, Roger. I'll second your motion.
Thank you for the second. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling,
Yes.
Mayor Peterson, Mr. Grubb,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Borboom,
Yes.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
Ms. Majo.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for all your work on the MCCJPA. We appreciate that as well. Moving on to item number 6, the property acquisition status report. How are we doing?
Yeah, on the screen here, I'll walk through a few things on the monthly status report. I think you're all very familiar with this by now. Maybe just point out a few items. On page, well, I guess I'm not sure which page that is, but the page I'm sharing on the screen is the overall status map. You can see there that if you include the acquired parcels and those that we've acquired via eminent domain actions, we're over 750 parcels to date. So progress continues to be made. There are a handful of those eminent domain actions that have been approved for settlement, and we're just, again, working through the paperwork to get all that processed, which oftentimes takes a month or two. And so I'm expecting that number will go down a little bit in the coming months. And so that's good news. Otherwise, as we mentioned earlier, we're going to be getting offers out on all the flowage easements here shortly, probably next week. And so next month, I am planning to have a separate map that focuses on the upstream mitigation area where we can zoom in a bit closer and we can track the status of those as we move forward. The next map talks about environmental monitoring easements. This is an area where we're continuing to make bits and pieces of progress. We got a handful of these acquired in the last month and a couple more just in the last few weeks here. And so chipping away at bringing that number down and kind of keeping working on getting those easements acquired. The next few pages drill in more detail. I don't have anything specific to ask, but all the boxes line up with what you saw on the overall status map. And I guess I'd pause for any questions if you have any.
Are we on time, on schedule?
We are on time and on schedule. We've been working closely with the Corps and their design teams to make sure we're progressing on schedule as necessary to meet their plans. We do anticipate getting started on Southern Embankment Reach 2B in April. and then look forward to starting acquisitions of Southern Embankment Reach 4 later this summer.
Very good. Anyone else with any questions? Sounds good, Eric. Thank you.
Bet.
Then we'll move on to the Cass County Joint Water Resource District update. Roger, do you have that?
Sure, just a short update. We just continue to negotiate through our land agents, and they bring us counter offers, and we were able to accept the counter offer, which was awesome. I think going forward here takes some properties off of the quick take actions, save some dollars. As we know, the lawyers don't work for nothing. So anyway, I think that's important to understand that, you know, these are costly going to court, and certainly we would certainly like to negotiate and come to an agreement that we both can approve. The environmental easements maybe they're coming slowly. I think our change in the amount that we offered has helped. And so the agents are just working on that and really looking forward to the Floyd easement study and appraisals and the engagement then with the landowners. That's my report.
Thank you. I've been sitting in on those meetings, and I really appreciate all the efforts that you and the rest of the board are doing, and of course the staff that's working with the landowners. It's not an easy task, and I especially appreciate the landowners' cooperation with us. Not easy for anyone, but we're getting through it. Thank you. Minnesota, Clay County, JPA.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think the last meeting that we had, of course, the vast majority of that meeting did take up the discussion on the land exchange that we just talked about here already today. There were a few other items, but I'm sorry I forgot my notes. We are meeting again tomorrow, right before the Diversion Authority meeting, so hopefully I can just give an update tomorrow for the full DA board regarding a little bit of last month's as well as what we do tomorrow.
Okay, good luck with that. Item number 9, the committee update for the DA board is in your packet. Eric, you went over the status. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think that slide is fairly straightforward, so I don't have anything specific I need to mention on there unless there's questions.
Okay, thanks. And do we have any other business? Any other business? Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and keep warm out there. We are adjourned.